right, now for our religion news, and this is something that's very, very interesting that I saw. This was over at BloombergQuint.com, and this is something that the Supreme Court was looking at yesterday, weighing in on the fate of a 40-foot cross built as a war memorial over in Maryland, and it's Bladensburg, Maryland. And essentially what this cross is that it's almost a century old, and it's also about this century-old fight over the role of religion in public life. And this concrete cross was completed in 1925 as a World War I memorial, and it's the center of the argument. The question, therefore, is, and this is what the court is struggling to lay out, clear rules governing when religious symbols are permissible on public land. And supporters of the monument in Bladensburg, Maryland, say the constitutionally generally allows religious displays, while opponents say the government can't show favoritism toward particular faiths. So the Federal Appeals Court said the cross endorses Christianity, not only above other faiths, but also to their exclusion. The ruling, if stands, could force removal of the monument. And the American Legion and an Area Park Commission are appealing that decision. So this is what's going on here, is that the cross currently sits on grassy island where three major roads converge, a location that offers prominence, if not accessibility. It rests on a base that includes a weathered plaque with the names of the men and quoted for President Woodrow Wilson. The words courage, valor, devotion, and endurance are engraved around the foot of the cross above the base. Across the roads are memorials commemorating veterans of World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. In the opposite direction, a monument describes the British victory at the Battle of Bladensburg during the War of 1812. So the cross supporters say the monument conveys a secular message. If the High Court agrees, it would preserve the cross without carving out new legal ground. I mean, after all, it's talking about, what did I just say? It's talking about valor and courage and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, that is pretty much a secular message. It is on a cross, which is a Christian symbol. But some backers of the monument are arguing the issue of a more sweeping decision that would narrow the Constitution's ban on the government establishment of religion. So history shows that the framers understood the Establishment Clause as prohibiting the coercion of religious belief or adherence, but not the acknowledgement of religion in public life. And Deputy Solicitor General Jeffrey Wall argued in court papers passive displays generally fall on the permissible side of that line. I mean, I would agree with him, because it's just saying that these type of displays are not a coercion, but an acknowledgement of religion in public life. It's just the way it is. So according to Richard Katsky, the legal director for Americans United for Separation of Church and State, this is what he said, that this could be a watershed change in the law. He said justices from across the ideological spectrum have said that government can't favor one religion over another. Hey, it's a bandwagon. Everybody get into the bandwagon, because these experts think it just it says that you can't favor one over another. Well, let's look at it a little bit more than that, because that's not what the Establishment Clause is all about. And it says, when the government chooses to honor people who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country, it should recognize them all equally, Katsky said. Well, you know what? There's a certain amount of truth in that, but not to the removal of the acknowledgement of religion in public life. I mean, after all, some things we need to look at. Now, it says here that the court's conservative leanings could make that a tough argument to win. Well, Mr. Katsky, I hope you don't win, because we should not be coerced not to display our religious symbols in public life. So that's what my thoughts are about this. Going on, it says, I'm pretty confident that not one of the justices will say that this memorial has to come down. And so there you go. These are the cases from the American Legion versus the American Humanist Association, and also Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission versus American Humanist Association. There you go. That's what I wanted to let you know. You need to always know who the source is, because you need to see who is really trying to remove our freedom of speech and our freedom of expression here in our public life in the United States. This report comes from our political news front, and the headline on this one, Colorado moves to bypass electoral college to stop Trump. Will assign electoral votes to popular vote winner. What in the world is this all about? Well, this comes from Steve Watson over at Infowars.com from the 27th of February, and it says here that certain political elements within the United States simply can't deal with the fact that our founders created a voting system that ensures limitations on mob rule stemming from a handful of cities throughout the country. So, to protect the rights of all Americans, including those living in smaller rural counties, they came up with the Electoral College, a method by which all Americans from varying backgrounds and ideologies can be represented during a presidential election. Well, what's this all about? Well, guess what? There's a governor over in the state of Colorado who just signed a bill that their legislature passed, where it says apparently they're a little upset because in 2016, Hillary Clinton officially won the popular vote. Well, that is also in dispute at this point in time, considering a lot of different factors and algorithms and different things in the counting of the vote and who voted. But nevertheless, let's say officially she won the popular vote, and she gained more total votes than Donald Trump. But because of the Electoral College, Trump ultimately became president. Seems like every time that the Democrats argue that the Electoral College is an archaic type of election method, it's when they lose. Well, according to this article. So Colorado, it says here, will become the 12th state to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Well, what does that mean? Well, they've joined I guess altogether 12 states, now the District of Columbia, which account for 181 electoral votes, just under 90 shy of the 270 votes a presidential candidate needs to win the White House. Bottom line is, when they get enough states to join along with them, they're going to make this compact to go into effect. Bottom line is, once it goes into effect, states that are part of the coalition will award their electoral votes en masse or en masse to the candidate who wins the national popular vote. So Colorado, am I getting this right? We have an election, and one candidate gets the counts of electoral votes. They look like they win. Another candidate has a few 100,000, maybe a couple million more in the popular votes because they got the population centers of San Francisco, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, that type of thing. And because those population centers that have nothing to do with the center of flyover America, they make up more numbers than the rest of them, then they're going to assign all of your electoral votes in Colorado to the candidate who won the most popular votes. It doesn't matter if your state actually voted and the popular vote within your state actually went to the other candidate. Doesn't matter, huh? That's what you want to do? Well, that's what this is proposing. That's the bill that was signed over in Colorado. Well, that's political news, and this has been John Craig. Well, also over in political report from gunsinthenews.com, where the House passes unconstitutional bill requiring universal background checks on all gun sales. By the way, I might just say UBC, as we continue with what this news is all about. This is from Tim Brown. He says there's a warning that anti-American gun confiscating politicians in the House of Representatives are going to attack the Second Amendment this year. But not only are they doing that, but in the same measure, they're attacking the Fifth Amendment, whereby you must prove your innocence before exercising your right to keep and bear arms. The House passed its unconstitutional legislation, which would mandate a federal criminal background check for every gun sale, including private transactions. Right now, the way it's set up is that if you've got a neighbor who wants to sell you a gun, you can just buy that gun from the neighbor. There's no background check needed or anything like that. Well, they're going to make that against the law to be able to do something like that. So with the passing of this bipartisan, it was put together by two representatives, Mike Thompson, a Democrat from California, and Pete King, a Republican from New York. Now, if you're from one of their districts, you need to give them a call and tell them what you think about this unconstitutional behavior. They've done it before. They're doing it again. Gun violence, they said Thompson, more specifically, is a true national emergency. Of course, that's another Democrat talking point that's out there. He says, I'm an avid hunter, but hey, this bill doesn't do anything to erode gun rights. I wouldn't support it. My name on it. Really? Yet it does. And it does affect our Fifth Amendment rights because it affects our right to due process. Yes, and remember Steve Scalise, who was shot in a mass shooting event by a Bernie Sanders supporter. He obtained his firearms legally. What does this type of legislation do to try to prevent a case like that? Well, they agree it would not prevent anything like that. What it does do is it makes it harder for law-abiding citizens to exercise their rights. That's what Scalise told The Hill on Tuesday. And it's an overreach. That's what this bill is. Like any and all federal gun laws, these criminal legislatures usurp their authority, not only are attempting to regulate firearms, but are also violating the rights of law-abiding citizens to deny them their due process. So basically, what this process means is that for you to purchase a firearm, which is to exercise a right granted to us by our Creator, it's not a privilege given by government, then we're being denied that right and liberty without due process. For example, this is what the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So, what is happening here? And you put that together with the second, right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So, Mr. Thompson, where does you avoid our rights to keep and bear arms and from being infringed upon? So let's keep that in mind. Let's look at another point of view. Senator Dianne Feinstein. She's a gun grabber. She wants to ban all guns unless they're protecting her. She said that no set laws will stop such things, which tells you that this is not about safety or security, but about disarming Americans. Well, that's not her words. That's according to this article. She understands that no laws are going to stop these things, but it does disarm us. I mean, after all, Mr. Thompson and Miss Dianne Feinstein, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to defend ourselves against some type of criminal who has obtained a gun illegally, to pull out our baseball bats and maybe swat away those flying bullets to protect our family and our lives and our property? Fiasco that took several, guess what? A background check wouldn't even matter, because that young man, he stole his guns. And where did he get it? He stole it from his mother and then killed her before he went to the school. So we need to take in consideration some of these things. And the one thing that we really need to keep in mind about the universal background checks, or the UBCs, is that it's advanced as a stepping stone to gun confiscation. Here's the process. UBCs, universal background checks, then firearm registration, and last of all, firearm confiscation. That's the pattern that every nation in the past has followed. You look at Venezuela. What is happening in Venezuela now would not have been happening had they still had their right to their guns. This has happened down in Australia. It's happened in many nations around the world when they took their gun rights away. You know, look at one nation over in Europe. It's Switzerland. It requires every citizen to own a gun because every citizen is considered to be part of the militia or that will protect the state from invasion. So there's some thoughts to keep in mind. Now, it's not thought that this will ever get over to the Senate, but make no mistake, this is what it says here in the article. This year, your rights to keep and bear arms is going to be attacked like it never was under Barack Hussein Obama, Satora, whatever his name is. So we must remain vigilant. Well, here to Life News, we have some really good news. How about that? There was a poll that was recently taken. This was taken from newswars.com, that a dramatic shift to pro side among Democrats and young people. Get this. For Americans age 45 and younger, the shift was from 28% identifying as pro-life 4 weeks ago. It shifts and moves to 47% today. Wow. From 28% identifying as pro-life 4 weeks ago, it jumped to 47% today. Well, how did this happen? Well, I think it has to do with the legislation in New York and Virginia, which would allow abortion up to the moment of birth, shows a major shift to the pro-life side among Democrats and young people. And this was according to Marist College for Public Opinion and the Knights of Columbus. And so this is what's happening with the Democrats, or these young Democrats. And they're identifying more and more as pro-life because they were at 20% just 4 weeks ago. It jumped up to 34%. And where it fell from 75% of being pro-choice to 61%, a 14% point change in only 4 weeks. So what's that mean for Americans altogether? That the percentage of young people who said they're pro-choice fell from 65% to 48%. In other words, those that are identifying as pro-life has jumped from 28% to 47%. That's almost a 50-50 split now for these young people, 45 and younger. Well, maybe it's because there's been an examination as to say, what is life and when do we recognize a baby as life? I guess when the Virginia government came out and said, well, when you just take these children and they happen to survive, then we can make that baby comfortable until the mother and the doctors decide what they want to do with that child. And talking about what they might do with that human life. I mean, the argument for years, advocates, which they like to flower up with being pro-choice because it's a woman's body. Well, when that baby comes out of that womb, it's a life. And I think people are recognizing it now that that's a life that's separate from the mother's body. So maybe they're drawing the conclusion that that life that's outside of the body is also a life inside of the body. And when that mother becomes pregnant with that baby, now that baby needs to have a voice and a right to live. Well, there you go. That's it for the pro-life news. We've got airstrikes and heading to the border and planes shot down in India. Was the host of the website The Economic Collapse, and He says that the Pakistani military was greatly embarrassed by a successful Indian airstrike or military depots in Pakistan. They were heading towards the border between Pakistan and India. Made some attacks into Pakistan on what they called were a terrorist camp or terrorist camps. And this was after a February 15th mass killing of Indian police officers. I mean, there was multiple. As I read the numbers, it was in the double digits. I want to say as many as 50 to 70 police officers. It was quite a number. You can check that on your own. But nevertheless, this is what we're looking at. India is the second largest country in the world by population, and Pakistan is the 5th largest, and they both possess large nuclear arsenals. So if the conflict continues to escalate, this is what could become really, really bad very, very quickly. So essentially what's happening is these Pakistani tanks and Indian tanks, they're both heading to the border. And if one crosses the line of control, then it's going to be difficult to see that, it's going to be difficult to get both sides to the negotiating table. So we've got to pray that they don't cross the line or the line of control. If this happens, we can have a conflict that could go nuclear very quickly. And for you a little bit more in regards to what's happening there. India has 1.3 billion people. They have a conventional army of about 1.4 million soldiers. Well, Pakistan's not quite that large. They only have a population of over 200 million people and about 650,000 troops. They've both spent billions of dollars developing conventional arms. Last year, Pakistan spent about 11.6%. Therefore, it could go very soon. Now, let's look at another part of the world, and that's what's happening down in Venezuela, because the U.S. could be about to enter into another new war as well. And this is where I was talking about last week about how Putin had talked about the capabilities of Russia and how they will no doubt move their nuclear arsenal closer to the United States if the United States continues to move their nuclear arsenals into the Eastern European countries and other countries that surround Russia. So Russia is going to have to make some moves accordingly. Well, the Russian Secretary or Security Council Secretary, Nikolai Patrushev, accused the United States of shipping troops to Colombia and Puerto Rico in preparation for an invasion to Venezuela. China has come out very strongly against military interventions in Venezuela, and Russia already has special forces there. So if someone makes a wrong move, it could also end up sparking a World War III. So let's keep our eyes peeled. Let's keep our eyes open to what's going on, because whatever move that these nations could take, one wrong move could unleash a series of negative consequences that will be quickly out of control. So there's some thoughts about what's happening there. That is it for the war news. Now over to Beast News. I have some trending news that we need to be paying attention to. And this is an article from pjmedia.com written by John Hawkins. Title of it says, "Time for Action. Chase Bank Denies Service to Conservatives." Well, what's happening at Chase Bank? If you haven't been paying attention, this is what's going on. Let me give you a background of basically what the trends are in the nation. Then we'll talk about Chase Bank. And in the article, it says it's hard to imagine how conservatives could be even more complacent if they actually are about what's being done to this country. First off, schools. Our children being taught almost universally run by liberals who hate everything we stand for, but demand that our representatives or let me rephrase this, but we don't demand that our representatives pull funding from state schools that behave that way. How about Hollywood? They've been vocally over the top hostile to Christians and conservatives, but we go to the movies anyway. So who funds their voice and their right to free speech? Well, we do when we support their movies. I mean, I'll sit there, be talking with my wife on so many different occasions where something might pop up on the television. I said, did you hear what they just said? Did I just hear that right? Did you hear the little bit of propaganda they just inserted into that script? Well, I hear that all the time. How about this? We still buy the papers and watch the cable news shows of networks that talk about us like we're Nazis because we don't agree with their liberal worldview, or shall I say globalist worldview. And then most recently, we've had an increasingly monopolistic social media companies that have an inordinate amount of control over who gets heard and who doesn't. And they've been targeting conservatives, and with just a shrug, and we just shrug and we just say, oh, how wrong that is, but we're not doing anything. All right, so this is what this article is about. I tend to lean with agreement of what this author is talking about. And he gives a quote, if you don't like the way they do it, take on those monopolies with hundreds of millions of users and billions in cash by building your own company. Well, right. Most people that are being affected are just people like you and me that are kind of middle-class conservative folks and don't have the wherewithal, whether it's funding or the technical ability to build our own company. So we rely on companies that have put themselves as a market square, marketplace type of company. So what happens when banks and credit card companies target people for their political views? Do we need to build our own banks too? That's the question. Well, why don't we ask people like activist Laura Loomer? She's already been banned by PayPal, claims she had her account suspended by Chase Bank. Well, and she's not the only one. Enrique Tarrio, the black leader of the Proud Boys, a group that's been laughably branded as a white supremacist organization by liberals, he was suspended by Chase Bank. And then also Martina Markova was, and I believe Martina Markova is I think she's a conservative entertainer. And then Joe Biggs, who is a conservative writer, he made enough stink when Chase made enough stink that Chase reluctantly gave his account back to him. And so we've got all these different things that are going on, but where's the history of this and where did it come from? Well, this is why I'm calling it part of the beast system news. The idea that citizens could be cut off from using a bank because of their political views is extremely dangerous. Imagine going to your bank and being told to produce your voter registration before you're allowed to open an account or get a credit card. So if Chase continues to do this, or they're allowed to do this, what type of world are we stepping into? Could it be that it's a world where our political views could keep us from being able to get credit or run a business? And let alone if we have a business, that business be shut down and we lose our ability to feed our families. Back in a year ago or so, there was a column in the New York Times calling for the weaponizing of the financial industry in exactly this way to shut down the gun industry as part of an effort to deny American schools Americans their Second Amendment rights. If you remember back then, there were some major gun manufacturers who lost their line of credit with banks, at least from certain banks, and which, if you think about that, that could have cost them an entire business, their factory shut down, people unemployed, because the bank said, no, we don't agree with the manufacture and sale of small arms. Well, going right along, Republicans in the Senate should demand that Chase executives come before them and answer some of these hard questions about targeting customers for their political views. And maybe they need to rewrite some banking regulations to hold them accountable for this type of discrimination. I mean, after all, isn't this discrimination? Isn't it another type of discrimination? Do we need to have more hate crime laws, or should we just actually enforce the laws that are on the books, that you just can't discriminate for anybody's belief systems, let alone the color of their skin, or their class, or anything like that, or their education status? None of that, or even their gender. But what are Republicans in Congress doing? And what is Congress doing about something like this? I don't think they are. And this is why there's an action that needs to be taken. We need to contact our senators and our congressmen to say, hey, are you aware of what's happening right now with the banks? So protecting the middle-class citizens from the abuses of corporations that are targeting them unfairly is not something conservatives have historically shied away from doing when it was needed. So come on, guys. Just want to say it's time that we remember that we have a voice, and it is in the collection of our voices together as one that it really makes a big difference, at least at this point in time in our nation. Well, this is another article under the Beast System News, and this is the dangers of a mandatory DNA database. And this is an article from theatlantic.com written by Connor Friedersdorf. So going on, last week I talked a little bit about the DNA and the sampling that the fast-track DNA investigations have been allowed, that was written or signed into law by President Trump. Well, in Arizona this week, a state legislator named David Livingston started a controversy about DNA may be a important of privacy nightmares to come. A law he proposed would have forced many residents to give samples of their DNA to a state database. Yes, force residents to give samples of their DNA to a state database to be stored with their names and social security number. And if passed, many people from parent, school, volunteers, and teachers to real estate agents and foster parents will have no choice but to give up their DNA. The Arizona Republic reported any DNA in the database could be accessed and used by law enforcement in a criminal investigation. It could also be shared with the government agencies across the country for licensing, death registration, to identify a missing person, or to determine someone's real name. So, I mean, they always have to say all the things that it could be used for and what they think it might be good for. But on the other side of it, this is a big, big intrusion into privacy because, after all, there's two primary dangers of universal DNA database. First, as Christine Rosen once wrote, DNA provides an inescapable means of identification, categorization, and profiling that is uniquely revelatory. The DNA in a person is a future diary. It provides genetic information unique to each person. It's the potential to reveal third parties as a person's predisposition to illness or behaviors without the person's knowledge, and it's permanent information, deeply personal, with predictive powers. Taken together, the coming age of DNA technology will change the character of human life, both for better or for worse, in ways that we are only beginning to imagine, both because of what we will tell, or what it will tell for certain, and what it will make us believe. To know one's future diary, or to know someone else's, is to call into question the very meaning and possibility of human liberty. I mean, after all, think about this. If they say, hey, you've got a predisposition for this type of cancer, therefore, it's an incurable cancer. And because of that, and the sheer medical cost of keeping you alive and at least give you a few extra years, it's going to cost the insurance companies and the government this amount of money. So we've set up a board and determined that that at this point in time in your life, we're going to terminate you. I mean, after all, if they're going to kill babies outside the mother's womb, then why not to people that are no longer useful in society. That's the danger of this. They just predetermine your date of death, essentially. Second, imagine a permanent database of information that powerful. I mean, how long do you anticipate the trove would exist before being breached by nefarious actors? My assumption is that all permanent databases of sufficient size and value will be hacked eventually, and sooner rather than later, when security infrastructure is designed and maintained by IT bureaucrats in state governments. I mean, here's another nefarious thing. Somebody could jump in there. They could hack your DNA, or maybe switch that DNA around by somebody else that has maybe a horrible looking DNA, or maybe they're a criminal. Put that in your case, and then all of a sudden point all of the different indicators and algorithms that you are a criminal on the run. And they will match that up with you and say, look at you. We found you. And where did your freedom just go? This is pretty nefarious. These are kind of the dark side of the DNA databases. We need to be on the lookout for. This is part of the B system, something to pay attention to. All right, here's another article under our B system news. It's everywhere this week that I'm finding. This is titled, Man Gets Live Chip Implant at a Mobile Fair. Yeah, this is from thenews.com over in Barcelona. Said that a trade fair held in Barcelona on Monday, a man volunteered to have a chip inserted under his skin live on stage. And this happened after another man who had already undergone the procedure showed off how he could make a payment with the implanted chip from his bank just by using his smartphone. And this guy goes on and says, hey, it's super for me, very useful, because I have an automatic house, he said. He added that he's further motivated by the fact he can withdraw the chip very easily, simply making a little cut and pressing it. The chip is about the size of a grain of sand. You know, we've heard about the rice size chips. Well, this is about the size of a grain of sand or two, and it's covered in a material that's biocompatible so the body doesn't degrade it over time. So just a important thing about how technology is taking these chips. Just think how easy it is to just insert something under the skin. I mean, that's where they're wanting to put it. Or, you know, a lot of people said, you know, I don't know if I would want something. We've talked about it in the past, or it's been talked about maybe something on the middle of the forehead. Well, if you put something on the forehead, perhaps if it's too big, you'll have a little bump there, and everybody will be looking at it and say, hey, what's going on with that bump on your forehead? Well, now if it's just the size of a grain of sand or two, and with that, in the wave of a hand, you can unlock doors, you can access your bank account, you can make a payment at the cash register. Just think about how easy that is and how many people would like that convenience in their lives. Well, the B system is alive and well. And just think, if the B system doesn't like your point of view, they'll just turn it off. No wonder we are encouraged and exhorted in the word not to participate in that system. So some things to keep our eyes on and open to. Well, we have another article now over here at the Currency News, and it is titled, There's Been a Mysterious Surge in $100 Bills in Circulation, Possibly Linked to Global Corruption. And this is found over at CNBC.com. And basically, here's the main points of it. The number of $100 bills in circulation has skyrocketed in the past decade. It would be troubling indicator for global corruption, as high denomination bills remain a go-to for criminals, given the anonymity and lack of transaction record. And there's certainly enough evidence to say it's an enabler of corruption, but it is also a way for people to keep assets outside of the financial system, says Nicholas Colas, the founder of Data Trek Research. So there's the bottom line. You know, well, where are these $100 bills coming from, and why has there been a surge? And it says here, it's leaving some of the economists scratching their heads. Here's one thought that I have on it, and I actually got this from over at stevequail.com, who says, well, I wonder what happened to all those $100 bills that were airlifted over to Iran and dropped off on the airstrips in various locations within Iran under the Obama administration and under the cover of night. Well, maybe some of those $100 bills are now flooding the markets in different places. But we have these, the circulation, it is surging right now, and it's actually at an increase. It's gone up quite dramatically. Looking at a chart here from the Federal Reserve showing that there's even more $100 bills out there than there are $1 bills in circulation. Imagine that. So they generally believe that's related to people around the world wanting to hoard cash. I mean, after all, 80% of the US dollar cash is outside of the United States itself, according to this article. And with that type of money that's floating around, people are using that to store value, especially during the times where we're living, that currencies are fluctuating like they are. And there's more money being pumped into the system. We've had the quantitative easing over the years where the value of the US dollar has dropped significantly. But accordingly, because it is the world reserve currency, it is destabilized or destabilized currencies all around the world. So people are keeping an eye on this. And with that said, that it is a $100 bill that actually has an average life expectancy of about 15 years, as opposed to a $10 bill that only has a life expectancy of about 4.5 years. That is basically how they calculate when to print more money to keep a certain amount in circulation. So these are some things that we're keeping an eye on, because the argument is that if they can get rid of these high denomination notes to curb international crime, and make people use the smaller bills, then it's a lot harder to carry smaller bills around in suitcases. So they want to kill the $100 bill. It's what Europe did not too long ago, where they killed the 500 euro bill. So you got to carry more euros in your pocket because they stopped producing the 500. It says here that the Federal Reserve and Treasury make $99 for every $100 bill they print and sell offshore. So that's a pretty good markup. That's what Kolos said. He said there's a natural desire to keep printing these things. After all, if they're making $99 on every $100 bill, why not? And he says here the U.S. government makes a lot of money selling them. Well, I would like to say I don't know if I necessarily agree with you, Mr. Kolos, because I think it's the Federal Reserve System. It is the bankers that make the money and not the U.S. government, because the U.S. government doesn't print the money. It's a Federal Reserve note. That's what it tells me when I look at them. So there you are for currency news. Over here, looking at the world news, here's the headline from the dailymail.co.uk. And it says, no deal, Vietnam summit ends abruptly as Kim refuses Trump's denuclearization demands. Leaders fail to agree on lifting North Korean sanctions and abandon lunch and cancel signing ceremonies. So what all happened with that? Well, these Michael Cohen talks have been going on in Congress, which most of the mainstream media was covering. Yes, one of the biggest events that could be leading eventually to a huge factor of peace within our lifetimes. Yeah, the mainstream medium was over there watching Michael Cohen lie again to Congress, but that's what I'm thinking about what he's doing. And the mainstream medium thinks, I guess there's more money to be made in watching that whole fiasco take place. But meanwhile, over here at World News, it says that Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un abruptly ended their summit in Hanoi early without signing a deal. He said the issue was Kim's insistence that all sanctions get lifted in return for early or only giving up some nukes. And Trump continued to tout his warm relations with Kim, but added, you have to be willing to walk away. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo added that progress had been made, but we didn't get all the way. So the planned lunch never happened. And Kim's state news agency, KCNA, said on Thursday, sincere and in-depth views were exchanged to bring about a comprehensive and groundbreaking outcome. So here we go. That's what's happening right now. It's always about pushing the can or kicking the can a little bit further down the road. I think that's what President Trump is doing. Every step is one step closer to a peace deal with North Korea, and ultimately to reunite North Korea with South Korea and bring the North Koreans into the 21st century. I mean, after all, isn't that what they need? But that's going on, and President Trump is continuing to push for the peace, and I think it's just another step along the way. So we'll stay tuned for more in the future.